Today is January 5th, which means it's the last day of Christmas, and we're going to talk about a bunch of common misconceptions about this holiday. The first common misconception, the 12 days of Christmas are not the 12 days leading up to Christmas. They're the 12 days that begin on December 25th and run until January 5th. In other words, all that time before Christmas, when everyone's singing Christmas carols and going out shopping and baking and decorating, that's all called Advent. And all the time after Christmas, when everyone's just throwing their Christmas trees in the gutter and going to return all the ill-fitting garments that their in-laws bought them, that's actually Christmas time. The day after the 12 days of Christmas is January 6th, which is also called Epiphany, and it's the day on which the church celebrates the arrival of the Magi to visit the Christ child in Bethlehem. In many Spanish-speaking countries, it's celebrated as Dia de los Reyes Magos, or Day of the Wizard Kings, and in a lot of those cultures, it's on that day that gifts are exchanged, because, after all, it is from the Magi that we get the tradition of giving gifts at Christmas time. So let's talk about those Magi for a second. Boy, are there a bunch of traditions built up around these guys that have nothing to do with the biblical account. Many people are accustomed to thinking of them as the three wise men, and you may even have been taught names, personalities, even ethnicities to go along with these apparently fully fleshed characters of many nativity plays, Melchior, Caspar, and Balthazar. But the Gospel of Matthew never provides us with any such details about the Magi. We don't know their names or backgrounds or ethnicity or anything about their personality. We don't even know how many of them there were. Matthew just says Magi, plural, and in some early depictions, the Magi were represented as being 12 in number, or even 40 in number, biblical numbers with nice theological significance. The reason why the Western tradition eventually settled on there being 3 Magi is because Matthew does mention that they bring with them 3 gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and so it made sense to depict one Magi holding each of those gifts. But that's just an inference. The text itself isn't specific. Oh, and another thing, when those Magi visited Mary and Joseph in Bethlehem, they would not have found them in a stable. Not only because there's no mention of a stable anywhere in the Gospels, it's actually to do with a mistranslation of the word kataluma, which doesn't mean inn, it means guest room. That's a whole other video. It's also because in the Gospel, according to Matthew, Joseph and Mary actually live in Bethlehem at the beginning. In other words, the Magi would have visited them in their own house. We three kings of Orient are... Another little tradition which has no basis in the biblical text is referring to the Magi as kings. Matthew never refers to them as kings. The only title or job description that he gives them is Magi, which could mean wizard or sage or wise person, but certainly not king. The tradition of referring to them as kings again comes out of the Middle Ages in the Western tradition. It's a little theological gloss, a way to emphasize the biblical title for Jesus as King of Kings, because 3 wise men, the Magi, come and worship Jesus. If these are depicted as being kings worshiping Jesus, it emphasizes the supreme royalty of Christ. It also happens to provide a little place in the story for nobles, rulers, officials, people in power who perhaps were a little disappointed to discover that the only person in the story of royal or noble birth was the out-and-out villain Herod, who tries to kill the baby Jesus rather than trying to worship him. In other words, referring to the Magi as kings is a way for a Christian king in the Middle Ages to be able to say to his people, you see, there is a place for me in this story. As long as I worship the baby Jesus, you can't take my crown away. Okay, I've had a lot of fun in this series pointing out the various contradictions and popular misconceptions that have arisen in our Christmas stories, but I'm not just doing this to be a Grinch or a curmudgeon and to point out everything that we do wrong. I think it's fascinating the way that our stories have grown up and sort of accreted like sedimentary rock with all of these contradictory layers and different aspects in them that come from different sources. Our traditions around Christmas are like a lot of folklore. They pull together all these different threads from different backgrounds that don't always fit together perfectly, don't make sense together. If you examine it too closely, it kind of starts to unravel. And that's without me even getting into all the extra biblical stuff like Santa and Rudolph and Frosty the Snowman, or even like the way we depict angels. Oh goodness, don't get me started on angels. In my opinion, it's worth us taking the time to analyze these symbols and stories, because culture is just the sea we swim in. Most of the time, we're not even aware of what's going on around us, but the holidays are like a rock sort of sticking up out of that ocean. It's a particularly visible expression of our culture. That makes the holidays like a knob that we can get a hold of and use to adjust our relationship to the culture around us, or even to move the culture in different directions. Depending on the way that we express certain traditions or celebrate the holidays, we can make what's normally subconscious, what normally just sort of resides in the unconscious background around us, temporarily explicit, which gives us the opportunity to think more clearly about what it all means and how we connect to it. When I'm pointing out ways that the traditional Christmas narrative has diverged from the biblical example, the point isn't so much that one is wrong and the other is right, so much as this gap allows us to see the way that our culture shifts, the way that our traditions change and evolve, and the meanings of those traditions as they relate to us changes over time. It makes what's invisible visible. In other words, it makes what would otherwise only be words into flesh.